Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Welcome to episode 49 of the Non-Monogamy Help podcast. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com and they'll either be read in the podcast or the column anonymously. If you want to read the columns and listen to the podcast, you can go to nonmonogamyhelp.com. Subscribe to our newsletter by going to go.nonmonogamyhelp.com/email and follow us on Twitter at nonmonogamyhelp. If you want to support the columns and the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month helps support the daily running of the columns and the podcast and shows a general vote of support. You can do that by going to patreon.com/Lola Phoenix. If you donate $5 or more a month, your name with your permission will be read at the end of the podcast. So sorry for the background noise. Let's get to this week's discussion question. If this is the first time you're hearing this, every week before I read the letter, I put forth a discussion question that you can use with your friends, partners, metamors, or anyone else to get to know them a little bit more. I also answer it myself briefly with a hell of a lot of background noise, again, to give you a little bit of context. This week's discussion question is, what is one behavior that you never tolerate? So for me, I think this would kind of like apply to friendships as well, because I kind of think that behaviors that we wouldn't tolerate in romantic relationships should also be things we don't tolerate in our best friends. But I guess sometimes when you are kind of especially if you cohabitate with people, it can be harder to deal with some behaviors than others. But I think for me, one thing that I really don't tolerate or tend not to like very much in friends or partners is arrogance. I don't really it just kind of is a general turn-off thing for me. I'd like people who are positive about themselves and about other people, but people who are just really arrogant, that just tends to make me feel gross, and I don't tend to like that. So that's for me. So let me repeat the discussion question again. It is, what is one behavior that you never tolerate? Right, let's get to this week's letter. When I met my current primary partner, they weren't available for an emotional relationship as they had a primary partner, and that was a boundary of the relationship. A month or two into us starting to date, the relationship with their primary partner ended, and as that relationship ended, ours became more connected and intense. From the start, we had irresistible chemistry. They would text me daily, almost excessively. The sex was amazing, and the energy was there. Once their other relationship came to an end, there was no longer a boundary to stop us from spending more time together, becoming more emotionally attached, and ultimately becoming primary partners. During this time, there were red flags. I was concerned that they were not doing the work to let go of their ex, release the anger and the trauma they had from the end of the relationship. We started to spend almost every night together. I didn't understand how they could have the literal time to process the end of a huge relationship while spending all their time with me, working and keeping 2 to 3 other relationships going. While love can be infinite, time is finite. I was not shy about bringing my concerns up to them. They continued to reassure me, and I trusted them. We had big conversations about how our relationship was changing, what the future could bring, and how excited we were. My partner brought up monogamy as a possible desire of theirs, and at first I was concerned about this. Was this a trauma response due to their most recent breakup? Was this something I wanted? My past few relationships had been polyam or open, and while this relationship was exciting and intense, it was also very new. After thinking about it, I expressed interest in exploring monogamy with them, but asked that we come back to this further down the line. Months passed, and my partner brought up monogamy a few more times, more casually, and I took these as confirmation that their mind was still on monogamy. I started to watch and analyze my relationships with monogamy in mind and concluded that this is something I'd want to try with my primary partner. This is when things got complicated. I wanted to let my partner know how I was feeling about monogamy and brought this up to them. This was about 6 to 9 months after our initial conversation about it. I let them know how I was feeling and asked them to do the same. What I heard from them was a huge surprise, and I'm struggling to adjust to it. They basically let me know that they could never identify as monogamous and wasn't interested in practicing it either. While they did have some conflict about it, and we've talked plenty about it, I still feel a bit shocked. I now understand that when they mentioned monogamy, they were not thinking about what they wanted or what kind of relationship they wanted with me. They were thinking about their ex. While I'm available to help my partners hash out what they want, work with them so that all of us can get past relationship trauma, I feel as though my partner maybe not deliberately gave me a false representation of what this relationship was, could be, and is. This is what I was concerned with in the beginning, and I trusted their response, and now I feel as though I shouldn't have. I feel as though they came to me with a desire that had to do with me and our relationship, and then changed their mind without telling me about it, while I carried on with only the information I knew. Now I feel lost. I feel like trust has been broken with my partner, and I'm not sure how to get it back. I now have this desire to explore consensual monogamy, and my partner doesn't want that. This brings on a whole other onslaught of questions for myself. Will I want consensual monogamy with other people? Could I even find someone that is interested in monogamy? Almost every queer I know isn't. Why do I feel shame about wanting consensual monogamy? Why am I now feeling extra sensitive to my primary's other partner? Would this relationship have become so serious if they never brought it up or told me when they were no longer interested? Would I still be wanting this if they never brought it up? I know your column is all about non-monogamy, and I'm in a non-monogamous relationship. I think that this can belong here, but I'm hoping that you could also help shed some light on the desire to be monogamous, and that's just what society expects kind of way, but consensual monogamous in the I've thought about this and want it kind of way. Before I get to my response to this week's letter, I want to make sure I do one little plug that supports the podcast. A lot of my advice involves encouraging people to seek therapy, and that can be hard. You can't always find a therapist that's near you. Sometimes they're not polyamory friendly, sometimes they're not LGBT friendly, sometimes they're not whatever kind of identity that would help you feel more connected to them. It can be really, really hard to find a therapist that gets you. And if that's the case, you can't find a therapist in your immediate area, then you can try BetterHelp. BetterHelp is an online platform where you can find a therapist and chat to them online, send them messages, and it's a lot simpler sometimes than face-to-face therapy. You could be like me and really struggle to get to a therapist's office. And BetterHelp does also offer some financial support options if traditional therapy isn't affordable for you, and that's another reason you haven't pursued therapy. So if you want to try it, support the podcast, you can go to betterhelp.com/non-monogamy help, no hyphens, and you can get 10% off of your first month. And why not? Give it a try. Now, let's get to my response to this week's letter. So, the first thing here is that, your sense of kind of feeling that your trust has been violated is really understandable. I mean, you don't say that your partner came to you just with the general subject of monogamy and wanting to discuss it. You literally say, and maybe you didn't mean it so literal, and maybe you didn't realize what you typed, but you literally say that your partner came to you with a want or a desire to become monogamous and mentioned it enough that you actually literally said to them, I'll think about it maybe in a few months. They came to you with the thought that this was their desire. It wasn't just a random discussion topic. It was something they put forth as something they wanted. And now they're saying they don't want it at all. And that is incredibly confusing. And, I don't know if they've really addressed that with you. Have they really talked about that with you? Because I've at least found with myself, when the subject kind of starts with monogamy or the thought of monogamy comes up, I will start to see it as a competition in a way, and that is really, it triggers all sorts of horrible anxieties within me. And I don't like the idea that there's this one space for this, there's one spot and you have to basically compete with others to get to that spot. And it doesn't bring up very good feelings for me, so I can imagine that it makes a lot of sense that you would all of a sudden now start to have problems with, and start to have feelings about their other partners, because basically they brought up this idea that they may want monogamy or they may want to try monogamy, and they've chosen you for that, and then now all of a sudden they're saying that they're not, but then you always have this fear in the back of your head. You're like, well, maybe it's because I've done something wrong and now they don't want to try it with me, but they're talking to other people and saying the same thing that they said to me, which is that they want to try monogamy, and maybe they're just not going to choose me. So yeah, of course you're going to feel anxious and scared and all of these feelings. That makes 100% total sense. So yeah, of course you're going to feel that. I think that what you need to have are more conversations with your partner about how you discuss things, because you kind of hit it right on the nose where you're like, I'm okay to help people hash out stuff, but you need to be told that that's what the conversation is. And it may not be that they did it intentionally, but to present this as this is what I want, when that is not the case, is lying. It's dishonesty. And your partner really needs to figure out why they did that and why it is that they didn't communicate. If they did feel that way, why didn't they communicate? That's a really big change, you know? I mean, it's sort of, in a way, the kind of comparison that I always make is that, like, people wanting kids. Like, wanting kids is a very big life change, and if you suddenly decide that you want kids, it's kind of really important, and you've always agreed with your partner that you're not going to have kids. If you suddenly decide that you want them, that's kind of something you should discuss with your partner and not just wait one day to spring it on them. Or equally, if you decided you don't want them, that's also something that you need to discuss, and you can't just avoid that because you don't want to have that conversation. So you need to, like, maybe work with a couple polyamory friendly therapist to work through, like, pick apart kind of why that happened and how you can prevent something like that from happening in the future. Maybe some boundaries around conversations, maybe some, I think if your partner had said and acknowledged, like, hey, yeah, I said that back then, but I don't really feel that way, and I changed, you know, if they'd given you a little bit more explanation, maybe you wouldn't feel so anxious about it. I just feel like there's more conversations to have. I think that all of these conversations about you wanting monogamy, like, I mean, I can't tell you that if this conversation never came up that you would feel differently. Like, no one's ever going to be able to tell you that, and it doesn't really matter anyways, because it's happened, you know, it's happened, it's there. You can't magically make it unhappen, so you shouldn't sit and sort of ponder on, well, what if this was never introduced? It has been, so it is what it is. When it comes to you yourself wondering about monogamy, I think that, you know, I always say in, like, my columns at my podcast, like, no one can tell someone else if polyamory or monogamy are more right for them. Like, that's something that you kind of have to glean for yourself, but I do think that there are some basic things to, like, thought exercises to go through in deciding whether or not polyamory is even, or non-monogamy is even an option for you to consider. The first thing that I usually say to people is, you know, agreeing to a non-monogamous or polyamorous situation means agreeing to a situation where your partner doesn't spend 100% of their time focused on you. And there are some monogamous situations where that does happen, where someone has a time-intensive career, then they may, or a partner who has, like, a really intensive hobby, just anything like that, where there are going to be situations where monogamous people agree to a relationship with somebody who can't devote their time 100% to them. And then there are plenty of people who can't do that sort of thing. Like, there are people who can't do long distance. There are people who maybe could not date a lawyer or a doctor, anyone with, like, a really intense long hours style career, and that's legit. So I think that's the first thing to think about. Like, are you actually fine with a partner who doesn't spend their time with you? I think that you sound like you are, because you have had other open and polyam relationships, but that's kind of up for you to really think about. Because the other thing that I've said, and I think I just said this in the discussion question, but I can't remember because my memory is terrible, but polyamory is about, and I say this a lot, polyamory should be about finding multiple fulfilling relationships, not about finding a bunch of halfway fulfilling relationships that kind of make you okay. And I think that's easier said than done, because, like, when we're with somebody, we don't want to just break it off. You don't want to just throw away a partnership that you've just put together. So it makes a lot of sense to not want to throw that away. But I don't think, like we say, relationship broke, add people doesn't work. Opening up your relationship to solve problems in your first relationship, adding another person to that equation isn't necessarily going to fix anything. So that is something for you to think about. Is this relationship fulfilling? That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do polyamory. It just means that relationship isn't fulfilling. So anyway, yeah, the first thing is about time. I think the second thing is about, is there a benefit to polyamory that you see just for yourself? So when I kind of talk to people, and usually, like, 9 times out of 10, people don't arrive at polyamory when they're not with somebody. Usually they're with somebody, usually someone suggested it. Most of the time I'm answering questions for people who aren't the ones that suggested it, and all of a sudden they have to, like, decide if this is what they want to do. And so that's pretty normal. Generally speaking, in those situations, I always kind of tell people to think about if they can see a benefit to non-monogamy that is purely selfish. Because so many people, I think, try non-monogamy because they don't want to break up with their partner, and the problem with that is that basically they're trying to save a relationship that doesn't really exist anymore. They're trying to save the monogamous relationship they had with their partner when they don't have that anymore. Like that ship has sailed, so they can't really save that because they have to realize that their partner isn't going to spend the same amount of time with them, isn't going to remain focused on them, all sorts of things. So like, can you find what I call an anchor, which is something where you see a benefit to it that is completely your benefit and isn't just keeping this relationship. And I think that it sounds to me, quite honestly, that you have been kind of pushed into really considering monogamy because this relationship has been so intense and has been really great, and you don't want to lose that. And so you've been faced with this real threat that you may have to, consider the benefits of monogamy in order to save this relationship. So naturally, you're considering the benefits of it, almost in the opposite way that people, you're kind of like doing the opposite in the way that people will consider and try polyamory so that they can keep their partner, and there isn't really a benefit in it for them, but they that's their benefit. I think that in a way that you're doing that a little bit with monogamy, like you're sort of seeing the benefit of monogamy as it applies to this relationship. And I think that maybe you should just think a little bit more about that, like, what are the only selfish benefits that not keeping any relationship, if you were single, what would you choose? I think that will help you get to a realization of what it is that you want to choose. But essentially, it's something that, it's honestly something that you have to tell yourself. I won't be able to tell you that. I won't be able to tell you what works best for you. I think that there are totally people who can do both monogamy and polyamory. I certainly felt like I could do both for a long time. I feel less and less like I could do both as time has gone on, but for a short time I did really feel like, there are some people who feel like polyamory is their orientation in terms of how they want to do relationships, or is unchangeable. I don't personally feel like it's always unchangeable for everyone. I think that for some people they can do both. So you could be one of those people who could do both. And you just have to decide what it is that you want to do. I would really, 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 really hesitate to do any kind of relationship with someone who presents to you like a want that they have and then changes their mind about it. Like, I just feel like that's really or even like, the thing is that no matter which way you cut the situation, it's bad. Like, whether it was never something that they wanted and they just told you they did, not great. Or if it was something that they wanted and then they changed their mind and are now going, I never wanted that, that's also not great. So you kind of, no matter which way you cut that, it's kind of not great. So you kind of just have to think about, okay, is that really needs to be worked through, because I just think that there's more to that story, and you need to find out what more there is to that story and why they decided to, if they didn't lie intentionally, like what's going on there, because that is definitely a red flag for any kind of relationship, monogamous or polyamorous. Somebody who communicates in that way, it's not great. So yeah, I hope that helps, and good luck. Thank you for listening to episode 49 of Non-Monogamy Help. If you want to be awesome, you can donate to our Patreon. Even $1 a month is super helpful, but if you give $5 or more a month, it means that your name, with your permission, will be read at the end of the podcast. And this week's current patrons are Laura Boylan, Chris Albury-Jones, Duke, Kia, and James Wartell. If for whatever reason you can't become a patron because life happens, then you can take 5 minutes, log into iTunes, find the podcast, rate and review it. That would be extremely helpful to me. It helps me get the podcast out there to new people. If you don't want to write a review, that's totally okay. I know it's awkward. You can just do a 5-star rating, and that's also appreciated. So yeah, if you have 5 minutes to spare, I would really, 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 really appreciate that. Anyway, thank you for listening this week. You'll get a new column next Friday and another podcast episode in a fortnight, and that'll be episode 50, which I think is the end of another season. Deep continued apologies for all of the horrible background noise and the sirens, such as the lovely one that you're hearing right now. I do not have a recording studio. I just record this in my flat, and I live next to a hospital, and this is what's going to happen. But you should be happy that I'm so close to a hospital, I guess, because if something goes wrong, then I've got a hospital right near me. Anyways, I'll stop talking now. Thank you so much. Bye. You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. Our podcast music has been provided by Chris Albury-Jones at albury-jones.com, and the art was made by Dom Jung at domduong.com. Thank you for listening.